Welcome everyone to NetBox Heroes. This is a podcast, as you know, that's inspired by the NetBox community and the network automation communities, where we learn from some of the awesome networking professionals in our community. I am Kris Beevers. I'm the CEO of NetBox Labs, and I'm going to host you today. Our goal with this podcast is to learn about the people in the NetBox and the network automation communities, learn how they've developed in their careers as networking pros, their views on some of the interesting problems that are faced by network teams today, how NetBox fits in, how other tech fits in. And today we have what I am certain is going to be a far-ranging conversation. We've got Eric Pearce, we've got Danko Trajkovic, we've got Milan Nikolic, sorry Milan, from Nutanix. And Eric and Danko recently were on a NetBox community call to talk about their work on an automated, what I would call hybrid cloud and data center inventory with NetBox at Nutanix. And we're certainly going to dig into that topic with the team in some depth today. Just by quick introduction, we've got Eric, who's an IT systems architect at Nutanix, long background in IT and network architecture. Danko, who manages network automation operations at Nutanix and has a background in network engineering. And of course, Milan, who's a staff network automation engineer at Nutanix, also with a background in network engineering. So thank you all for joining me today. This is going to be a really fun conversation. And we're going to get started on the personal side with just a little bit of professional background. And, first, I think our community often wants to hear a little bit about your journeys, right? How did you get started in networking, in IT infrastructure? And maybe like what's something that you really enjoy about working in infrastructure? So I'm going to throw it to Milan first.
Okay, thank you. I started right after the Faculty of Electrical Engineering. I started with CCNA. So let's say that the first love of networking started with Cisco. I learned a lot from that course, and afterwards I kept learning throughout various courses and various YouTube clips. I first was Danko actually was my first colleague in mobile provider in Serbia and started as an enterprise network engineer. Afterwards, I moved to more transmission network engineer role with MPLS and ISP support. And let's say 5 years ago or something like that, I started working on network automation. Initially, my idea was to automate some repetitive stuff. But after a while, I got more and more ideas, and I explored many other opportunities with automation. Around the same time, I started with NetBox. So let's say that was the time before there was API introduced. So we used the CSV import for most of the cases, but we believe that API will be there in the future. So we stick to it. So yeah.
Awesome. Oh, thank you, Milan. So I'm going to pass it next to Danko, maybe for a similar bit of background. How'd you get started in networking, and what's something you enjoy here?
So a similar story, but maybe even before faculty, when I was choosing like what I'm going to study, I chose networking because at the time I enjoyed the LAN parties with friends, and that required you to know how to set up a local network so you can have those old big computers that everybody spend hours carrying from one place to another, connected to each other, so you can play favorite games of the time. So yeah, that's what really got me like, okay, I'm gonna choose a faculty that has a network-oriented curriculum, and CCNA and CCNP was included in the faculty. So that was a great starting point. After that, I joined the same mobile company Milan mentioned, and yeah, after a while and a few companies later, there was a point at which we found it interesting. Okay, let's not do things manual anymore, or let's investigate how it would look if we try to automate something little by little. It started maybe from Python, a strange landscape at that time, dominated maybe by a tool called rectables that didn't have many programmatic approaches to it. So when NetBox came to market, as Milan mentioned, I think community was already eager to transition to something as powerful as it became.
Really interesting. I think one of the points you make is true of I would say some really large chunk of the IT ecosystem, which is we all started by playing whatever, MechWarrior or Doom or Quake, or one can age oneself with
Everything,
how one got
yeah.
started in IT, right? Uh, and same for me. For what it's worth, ultimately you fall in love with how does it work behind the scenes. Great. And Eric, last but not least, why don't you give us a little bit of background on how you got into networking and IT?
Yeah, I would say I was more of a frustrated programmer. I started at Boston University and then started working for them full time, but it was always from a kind of Unix systems programming background. And actually applied for a networking job there, and they did not accept me. So I was kind of I was interested in networking, but didn't have a good outlet for it. I was always coming from this programming background, and I had to change jobs. I actually started working on a book for O'Reilly and Associates. I don't know if you remember them. They're the ones with little animals on their cover. And that I was actually eventually hired by O'Reilly to be a system administrator for them. And they had an office in California. So I went out there and became their, system administrator there. And that involved some networking. So that was finally the first chance I got to do it. We're talking, like 56K lines and ISDN and all that stuff. I'm sort of dating myself. And when I did the CCNA, CCNP track, it was, TCP/IP and also Novell NetWare, Apple Talk, all that stuff. But I really found I enjoyed that, and just, it was the first, I don't know, big example where I could say, I did that. I enabled, these locations to work together across the country, and that's what I get out of it. Is before. This was a time where I was actually able to see the results of my work, and the entire company depending on that. So that's I never moved away from that. That was the real kick for me.
Yeah. For engineers, I mean, one of the words that I hear often is impact, right? And that visceral feeling of having an impact on your colleagues or the community or whatever it is, it's pretty addictive. Um, all of you guys, and Milan and Danko, you touched on this, at some point started to turn to automation. And Eric, as we were preparing a little bit for the podcast, you shared some thoughts on getting started here and some lessons you learned around getting started in automation in particular. And I'd love for you to share some of that. What is some of what you've learned about like just getting started and diving into whether it's networking or automation or any of it, through your journey?
Yeah, I'd say my reoccurring theme for me is, I've taken lots of courses. I've actually written courses for Riley and Associates and Microsoft, places like that, and I find a lot of those suggestions at the time were, here's this sort of fake environment, and then write a program in your desired language for that. A classic I remember was, write a system to organize recipes or something like that. And I find that never worked for me. I always had to solve a real problem at my day job, and that's how that's how the knowledge was retained. Early on for me, it was Perl was the the big thrill then, even though I guess Python predates it. And but the way to learn for me was find a real problem at work and solve that using the technology you want to learn. And that way you retain it, and it's something real. But these fake learning exercises never work for me. So I would say that's a continuous that applied to almost anything I'm learning.
I think it connects back to that impact point to a degree, right? Being able to sort of connect the thing you're learning about with real outcomes, is again like a visceral feeling that almost like locks in some of the learnings and locks in the impact that you've had. And we're going to talk about outcomes a lot today, I think. But before we move on, I'd love Danko or Milan, if either of you have thoughts on this theme too, lessons along the way in your journey or guidance for the many folks in our community who are early, either in their network careers or in their automation careers. Anything that stands out?
Well, Eric said something, and I just remember the same kind of thrill that I experienced. So first time when I started with automation, I started with some small things like connect to device and do this or that. But I remember the thrill when I first collected information about more than 100 of devices, and with the correct data about everything about the device, plus interfaces, IP addresses, etc. So it was a huge file with really a lot of useful information generated in matter of minutes. So I just remember the thrill. I was like, wow, I did something amazing for this. It could take like days, not minutes, days. And I remember that feeling. Regarding the journey, it is always good to plan ahead in terms of think about the outcome that you want to achieve, but at the same time, don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's kind of normal thing to do. We started with in initial projects when we started with NetBox, we started planning in a way what we want to achieve in the end, and we really planned and perceive about a lot of obstacles that we will have throughout that journey. But also, yeah, we made some mistakes, and that's quite normal. You need to regroup, maybe rethink a bit, and then not from scratch, but you are starting smarter. Even though it was a mistake, you now know for the next time and next iteration, completely different project, but also automation, you know that you will not repeat the same kind of mistake. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Learning is encountering,
Yeah.
failures, right? And the only way to do that is, get moving, more or less. And I think we see that. I mean, even in the NetBox project itself, or here at NetBox Labs, the way we build products, we very much have this same mentality that you've described, Milan, of like, let's get it out there. And see what happens, and learn from sort of the contact with the real world. Any thoughts, Danko, on this theme of learning, or the lessons along the way?
The colleagues covered it pretty well. I would just add, don't be afraid to start with anything, write, debug, anything that will make it work. And our Git repo, the internal one, is a testimony of that. Like if you just go back through it 3 years, you can see every individual's code, how it looks then, and those are the starting points. So don't worry, this happened to all of us, and it probably should happen and needs to happen for everybody. That's the way you progress through it. Of course, having a colleague in the team that is willing to share, use them. If you have anybody, they are your highway to knowledge. Like they went through all of the pain points. Don't be afraid to ask. If you find somebody like that, keep close, and you are gonna get far. But if you don't, also community is strong with NetBox. We are constantly on the internet looking solutions, how to find it. So we are not discovering or developing many things like ourselves. We are just kind of a combination of solutions that we find online that many of other people already walked before us. So use all the resources you have.
Can I add something to that?
Oh, of course, Eric.
Yeah, I don't know how to say this, but a lot of my Python code is just like collections of things I found on the internet, and I like, oh, that's pretty close to what I want, and then I can take that final step on my own to modify it to do exactly what I want. But there's this, definitely my feeling was embarrassment, showing people my code, and then as part of working for a team, that I think that goes away, right? That I can put something in the repo and everybody else can see it, but I know the origin was just something I searched on the internet, and there shouldn't be any shame on that. I think that's perfectly fine. And I think I had a recent thing where I told Danko, "Oh yeah, I stole your code," and his reaction was, "No, that's what you're supposed to be doing, is reusing it."
Exactly. It's also, I think, what you guys are also emphasizing is the power of like an open community that's sharing code and sharing learnings, right? It amplifies the velocity at which we all move. And I think we're seeing the network automation ecosystem now accelerate a lot because there are communities forming and there's ideas and code and projects and whatever being shared, NetBox among them, but many others as well. You guys have already started to touch on NetBox a little bit, but now I want to turn the corner toward talking about how NetBox fits in for you at Nutanix a little more. One thing I want to remind folks who are watching this podcast later on to do is go and look at the July 2024 NetBox community call on YouTube. It's up there, and Eric and Danko are on there talking about some of the things that we'll revisit in this podcast. But sometimes it's good to get a couple different iterations of a story or the learnings. It was a really great call, and certainly inspired me to get on with you guys and talk through some of what you've built here. So, let's talk about the before times. And Milan, you I think you touched on this, or maybe it was Danko, on prior tools, prior stacks before NetBox. But I'd love to just get a sense from you guys of what was data center and cloud infrastructure operations and network operations at Nutanix like before NetBox, and then why when you found NetBox, what drew you to it? Let's talk about that a little. Who wants to take a first stab at that?
I mean, I wanted to say something about like what did we do before NetBox, and I was always just kind of Mr. Network Monitoring in the previous companies. That was my starting point, and then I sort of realized that those became inventory systems over time. But if you
Nagios
I'm going,
or whatever,
yeah, I was like Mr. Nagios at one point. Had this, but I had this moment where I realized the power of it. So Nagios had to know about every single switch and network device to monitor it. That's kind of like my first inventory, right? It wasn't in a database, a real database. But an example I can think of was I was monitoring a whole bunch of systems and then automatically running, remember the smart disk drive test, and that also produced the model number and manufacturer of the drive. So that was I realized, as a side effect of monitoring, I had a very up to date inventory of all the disk drives. And what that enabled me to do was I spotted a specific model that was failing, in under 2 years, where the typical life was 5 years. So I used that monitoring system to figure out which systems had it, and I proactively replaced all the disk drives that I knew were going to fail of that model. That was like a very, eureka moment for me.
Of almost the power of having that kind of visibility.
Right. But I to go back to NetBox, I never had a good place to store and search for that information before using NetBox. It was always some Excel sheet or, bare text file kind of thing.
Great.
Okay, I can continue. Just for context, Eric has been with the company for the longest, so he can maybe fill the gaps before myself and Milan joined. We joined roughly similar, maybe 6 to 9 months difference. And when we talk about the story, the time of Nutanix before NetBox, it's the story of both DSIM and IPAM. DSIM, Eric pretty well covered. Just for Nutanix, the solution was SolarWinds, and when we started figuring out how our network infrastructure looked like, we went to it and said, okay, this is the best we know, like what we have in the network, so we are gonna make it a starting point. Yeah, and on the other side, I think I don't know if there was a call you were on that said that their IPAM solution was not an Excel sheet before. Like if you go far enough, everybody probably comes to the
Excel
point that
or something
an
like
Excel sheet.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, that's the environment we came from. Maybe a interesting anecdote was at my hire time, Nutanix acquired a company based in EU, and I was a first hire in EU. Due to that, I had a very slow and long onboarding. I didn't have many colleagues to work in the same time zone. But one project that I was introduced early on was to build a new office in the Netherlands, the office that I've been relocated after. And after coming back from that project, I realized, whoa, we did all of this manually. And because the onboarding was slow, I had a lot of time on my hands, to do something or do nothing. But I chose to spend that time to say how I'm never gonna do it again like that. And the first code or script that we created at that point was to automate a site deployment for a new office, and NetBox was already there. So this was like that project triggered installation and deployment of NetBox in our company. And at that point, Milan wasn't working for the company, but I called him and we talked like, yeah, I know you had more exposure to it. How do I provision prefixes, VLANs from it, and answer all of the questions that a script like a site deployment needs to answer. And I don't really remember how we pushed it as a DSIM. I think we started little by little taking from SolarWinds and importing, but I remember how we transitioned the IPAM portion. It was by getting everything from IPAM, sheets into NetBox IPAM, and then locking sheets one by one as we were done, and then talking to the colleagues, creating meetings, and just saying, trust us. You need to trust us. This is going to change your life. And we were lucky that they did. And many times afterward, they confirmed that it was the right thing to
do. Something, Danko, you said there, and sorry, Milan, I'll let you speak in just a moment, but I just want to call out, and it has to do with how most organizations start using NetBox, which is, first of all, an engineer says, there must be a better way. There's something that they're frustrated by. And it's not a different story than automation all in, as we've talked about already, right? The best way to get started with automation is go solve a problem that you've got, that's practical and probably pretty narrowly scoped, and don't overthink it. And it's the same with NetBox, right? In your case, you had to spin up a new office and it was painful and you said there must be a better way. And this is over and over. This is the story of NetBox in almost every organization I'm lucky to talk to. Milan, you were going to add some thoughts there.
Yeah, you just covered some portion of that as well. So initially, when we started with all of this, it is usually great if you have support from everybody, like from your leaders, your directors, etc. But it's not always like that. You first need to show why something is important, and that is usually the best way to solve some issue that there is for a long time. And usually those things, like, this is really simple to resolve, and afterwards you will build up on it. Like, you will add more and more value, and you will solve more and more issues in that way. I just wanted to add that. So we started first mini project was to create something which is redundant, which has tick all the boxes. We started with airbag in mind. Also, we started with that. Like, we wanted to have different teams using NetBox as well. So even though there was it was not complete, there was not additional additional permissions per tags, many things were added afterwards. We knew that will happen because we just followed the community, and you can see there, whenever we had some great idea, like, this is really needed, this should be in NetBox, that was usually there in a couple of months, because we were not the first ones who actually experienced that kind of issue or facing that problems. So that was the key point for us, I believe. Like, yeah, we believed, we started, but when we saw that whatever we have as an issue was resolved in a matter of months, that was really great sign for us to communicate to our leaders and directors, and they were also involved afterwards when they saw how NetBox really solved some issues. They really was involved afterwards. So we had great support as well there. I need to say that because that is really important. But if it's not there, you need to invest a bit of time just to show value, and afterwards I'm almost certain that everybody will see that, because it's undeniable.
Really interesting. And Eric, you're going to chime in. One other thing I'd like to sort of prompt you to chime in with a little bit is, over on the DSIM side, obviously here we've heard a little bit about how NetBox came into the infrastructure, driven by the experience Danko had in this office spin up. But then it ballooned from there, and you may have some perspective on that expansion as well. But please do add to Milan's point as well too.
Yeah, I was going to say two things at least. One, there is there still is a general suspicion, I'd say, of open source projects. Like, can we really rely on this thing as a business? So there's considerable effort on, kind of proving that a open source project is healthy and has a future, right? There's this built-in doubt, right? I mean, I was peripherally involved in an earlier effort, and I think they spent something like 1.5 million trying to get a commercial product installed, and that actually failed. But the NetBox is free, right? I mean, you have to say it's not completely free, right? You need all these, you need in-house talent, right, to maintain it, typically. And what I'm saying, there's a part of the message to the company is, right, this is a good thing. It's used by these reference customers, and we can support it in the long run. There's lots of indications of health of an open source project, right? How frequently it's updated, how many people are contributing, right? And evidence of these, user communities around it, and even your podcast, right? Those are all showing this thing's viable and, supported worldwide. And then to switch topics a little bit, I was going back to, I've like a recurring theme for me is I think that, I like the technology problems and those are solvable, but the real challenges come down to humans. I think that's kind of a recurring theme in my career is that now we have something that it was viewed as a threat to some people, right? That some people have built their positions so they rely on them having this unique knowledge, right? They derive power and prestige within organizations by being the sole group that has that information. So NetBox can be kind of threatening to them, right? Like in an existential basis, right? Because, we've had, like, I can even think of networking teams that would never allow anybody to look at anything like a network map or, what do they use, right? So there's this challenge I think we continue to face is, someone thinks they're the owner of information for the company, and here comes along NetBox, and we want to throw it all in there, right? And make it available to everybody. And that can be a challenge, just convincing people that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's such an insightful point. There's two things I'll just briefly react to, and then we'll move through the journey a little further. One, I think it's really insightful, Eric, that you point out some of the challenges that organizations have adopting open source generally, right? We see this over and over, and it's actually why NetBox Labs exists. Is we observed in the ecosystem that NetBox was increasingly becoming critical in all these really important companies, but it needed investment to sustain and scale and be call it justifiable as a way of solving these problems in this critical piece of the infrastructure. And ultimately, that's our job: is make sure that NetBox stays around and progresses and adapts with the times, and continues to have a great community wrapped around it and all that stuff. It's really important, even just for people to be able to adopt a project like this, as you pointed out. And then the people problem is such a huge problem, right? Usually NetBox is brought in an organization by a champion, as Danko described, right, who sees a problem. The open source nature of NetBox means it's amenable to just be applied. Like, an engineer has the power to bring it in and apply it to some sort of problem. But really locking in a team around NetBox and unlocking the value of it requires a bit of a mind shift. And I think the good news, and this is part of why this podcast exists, is that now there are many recognizable teams and organizations that have progressed in their journey through, network management, network automation with NetBox and other tools that have demonstrated the value of, opening up this information and access to this information, and that, they can be almost superheroes in their company by so doing. And so it's a little less threatening when we're able to sort of see around the corner, I guess I would say. And that's maybe where I would like to go next with all of you. And then what, right? So, NetBox came into Nutanix around, these more narrowly scoped problems. There must be a better way type scenarios. It grew in its adoption probably because it's useful, but you've been working on some really interesting stuff around NetBox recently, and we heard about it on the community call. this crawler architecture that you've built, and all the impacts of it. So I want to spend some time now, delving into that. And so I'll ask, and whomever wants to take this, go for it. First, like, what is the role of NetBox at Nutanix today, all in? And then let's dig into the automation architecture around it that you've started to build. Who'd like to take the first stab at this one?
Eric, do you want to take the role? And then Milan might be great to cover the crawlers as a developing engineer.
Sure. I guess, I've been calling it sort of the NetBox Effect or NetBox infrastructure, but it's become we first started with sort of conventional networking in there, those individual switches, hardware components, thousands of switches and access points, things like that in there. That's the most traditional use. And the next big initiative, I think, really came from Danko Milan, which is the cloud plugin where we could provide the ability to inventory the public clouds. There's a recurring theme here that we're kind of we have the ability to have all these different types of resources. So physical resources like hardware, and then virtual resources, say the cloud. Then obviously Nutanix is a hypervisor company, so we have our own kind of private cloud. So I mean the great thing for NetBox, for me at least, on that is to be able to kind of search across all of those. I'm unaware of any other system that has such a wide domain, right? That's incredibly powerful to be able to maybe have fragmentary information and you want to find something. I was thinking like there's a security analyst type persona, right? They get a report of here's this IP address doing something bad. Where does that exist on our network? And eventually I want to get to the person that actually owns that, right? And tell them, hey, shut that off, or change behavior on there, close down that open port, right? And just the ability to go across all those domains and find something is pretty incredible. I mean, there's products that are cloud centric or private cloud centric or on-prem centric, and this is that's the amazing thing to me, is to be able to go across all those domains simultaneously. I think I was trying to think of we've added those over time, and kind of our latest thing now is try getting actual server inventories from our data centers in there. So that's like 4 different domains basically, and we can search across all those. And it's I think Danko could go into this more, but it's basically this is our source of truth, and it's the basis of all automation that we build upon there. Like that, they all have this pattern where our code basically downloads a list of assets to this crawler, and it goes out and scans the network for changes or deletions or additions, and then updates that back to NetBox. That's our current model.
Just quickly before we dig into the crawler architecture a little bit more. So what I'm hearing here is, and this is a pattern for almost any substantial organization, right? There's heterogeneity in your infrastructure, right? Like you don't have just like a data center or a cloud provider, right?
That's
like
actually
got all of it.
A big sales point of Nutanix, right? Is this what they call it, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud.
Hybrid cloud.
Right? We do everything, but so NetBox are currently our tool for tracking all of that complexity, right? And normalizing things.
Yeah, that's right.
Use all these areas have different concepts and how they store information or names or IP addresses, right? But we had to sort of normalize them so we can do searches across all of them.
And this is where the crawler architecture fits in, I think. And so maybe Milan or Danko, you can take us through what is that?
Danko wanted to say something. If
of course.
I just want to maybe to offer a perspective, because on your question, what NetBox is for Nutanix, and that has changed over a year in a way that I think is very interesting. Like maybe 5 years ago, we saw it as a great DSIM and IPAM for the networking. A year in, we were so in love with the project that we started calling it a single source of truth for Nutanix. And then over the years, we realized single is hard to achieve. It would involve many teams really just using that. So today it's system of records that's very absolutely authoritative for networking, and then it has great cloud and on-prem data center infrastructure. The way what we do is we offer this data through NetBox and then challenge other systems of records to see if they are more precise or up to date, or do they provide the granularity NetBox does. So now it's a challenger on the Nutanix internal landscape market as a source of data, system of records.
Oh, I can't let this go without sharing some thoughts. It's such a deep topic, and you know, when you are out there in the network automation community or the network community, there's always this question, like, first of all, what is NetBox, right? Or, you know, what is a source of truth, or is there such a thing as a single source of truth? And you've really struck on a hot topic that everyone is talking about and thinking about. And I think, you know, brought some really important insights here. The reality is there are a million sources of truth, right? Like definitive sources of truth out there. And this is what your crawlers get at is, you know, they go and they talk to these sources of truth. And in some use cases, in like network for you, NetBox is the source of truth. It is the place you write down the intent or what you want the network to be doing. In other cases, NetBox is a place that you aggregate data from other sources of truth because it is useful to have that aggregate view. And as Eric talked about, to be able to, you know, cut across it and explore it in this, you know, call it hybrid infrastructure environment. Super interesting and really helpful, I think, for a lot of folks. All right. So Milan, tell us about crawlers.
Okay, so initially we started with traditional crawlers because we wanted to have the data about our all of our devices, which are mainly Cisco, Arista, Dell, and let's say Palo Alto for firewalls. So we wanted to have everything about them, not just the IP or the model. We wanted to have all the facts and all the interface data, their interconnection, etc. So at that point in time, we didn't find anything useful in terms of like to achieve all that. There was I cannot remember the exact name, that kind of initial connector or something like that, where you just add devices and it will add them to NetBox with basic. It was afterwards like a plugin for basic import, but we didn't want that. We wanted more. So we started working on them one vendor at a time. And in the end, we managed to have data from all of these vendors imported into NetBox with specific with Nutanix specifics in terms of this is access switch, core switch, firewall, etc. All of the data that is needed for an engineer to know everything about that device. And that was kind of incremental process. Of course, we started with a lot of facts, but still we didn't have the proper let's say the proper filtering, etc. So we then went back. That's why I said you start small, or however you start, and then recheck your priorities and go back and maybe change something in your code, in your approach, etc. So now we have all of these devices and we have the current data on them. We decided not to go and delete anything at that time. We afterwards added more. That's the next iteration, or phase 2 or something like that, because if you do it this way, you will add more and more more and more interfaces, IPs, and then you will have bad data, or not. You will have some old things that are removed. That process we actually solved with additional custom field, which is crawler last seen. That's when the crawler, it's self-explanatory. Last time that the crawler actually found that on the device, and then we can compare that data and see if something is ready for deletion or not. So in order to have the current data, we also started with archive, where we move all of the data that was ever on NetBox. It will go to that particular instance. So let's say 2 months from now, somebody from security comes and say like, yeah, we had this incident, this IP started doing this or that. We cannot see it now, but it started 2 months ago. We can go there and see who had that IP and where it was. What was it? Was it like a VM or what was that? So that's the kind of iteration from our crawlers of the traditional network. Then Danko worked on crawlers for access points and Nutanix infrastructure, where we collect everything that there is, like data about the VMs, about the clusters. And now we are working on additional crawler. More about that will cover Eric and Danko, because that was the theme of the previous call. But at the same time, we started with, or not at the same, maybe 2 years from that, we started with crawlers for public cloud. And also we wanted to have the exact same data from there, like to collect everything networking wise in terms of, and from all of, from AWS, GCP, and Azure. So we started collecting data from there, and what to do with that data. We didn't know where to put it, so we had to deliver some kind of plugin for it, because there was nothing in in the community for that. But there was constant communication about those crawlers and about those plugins. So we started with, I want to really stress out this. So we started with basic NetBox tutorial for plugins. So we started from there, and we went there and started one by one, like literally go like this, and really helped us with at least some basic things. We get some things done, and we started small, of course. And when we added first model, when we added first thing over there, we were really amazed that it worked. We really didn't expect that it will work from initially from we spent a couple of maybe a week or so until we had something to show. And then we observed that there are many additions that we wanted to add, and we started adding them. And there were some problems we didn't know how to solve, because those were more complex things, and we were kind of stuck. And then what to do now? Then we started typing on community on Slack, and then we received responses almost instantly. Let's say in a day, the most. In a day, you had maybe not the solution, but at least you should explore this, you should check that, or something like that. And we are really grateful to the community because of that. So usually the documentation is really good. And the community is even better, because
I want to emphasize this, Milan, and just reiterate a couple things you've said here that I think are important. So you're talking about building a plugin, and the reason that you built a plugin is you needed to model infrastructure that isn't in NetBox's core set of models, and in this case, cloud infrastructure, right? And so you set about that by going and building a plugin to extend the NetBox data model, which we're lucky. There's all these great data model extensions in the community. And also we see that many organizations just like you have unique modeling requirements, and they go and extend the data model. And then you found the art of doing that to be pretty approachable, it sounds like, between a combination of documentation and the engagement of the community. And so I just wanted to reiterate for those who are listening, that's what you were doing here. Is you said, you know what, we really want to model that public cloud infrastructure. We're going to go build a plugin to model that the way we think makes sense. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And I want to add one more thing. When we started, I had almost 0% of experience on Django or something like that. I really haven't done anything on that front ever before. So yeah, we were versed in Python. We had a couple of years of experience, let's say 3, 4, something like that. But I've never done anything of that scale. I created some kind of Slack bot application. It was a quiz, it was a game, but it's really simple. I didn't do anything more. I don't know. It was really simple, I would say, like that. So my knowledge and experience there was really junior level, and I started with those. With that documentation and plugin tutorial, and then we also built on top But that was really great start for somebody with really not a lot of knowledge in that field. So yeah.
I'm glad you shared it, and just one last point on this. Again, like we see a lot of folks extending the NetBox data model through plugins. The reason there's such a huge ecosystem of community plugins out there is that, as you've just described, in fact, the barrier is not that high to get going with it. All that said, one thing also for you guys in the future, but really for our community at large, like we want to keep lowering that barrier. We want to make it really easy to extend and adapt the NetBox data model without losing like what makes it really powerful, which is the connectedness, the cohesion, the structure of it, that makes it easy, as Eric talked about, to see across the data in all these different models and explore them in a natural way for network and infrastructure engineers. So really helpful thoughts. I want to just reiterate also, I think, Milan, what you've described at the highest level is this crawler architecture that emerged over time, right? So there are different components of your infrastructure, started in the network, ultimately to cloud, and then now more recently, I think, to data center, where you've got these crawlers and they're running. I think I recall they're running in GitLab on runners or something like that on some frequency, and they're going out and they're talking to this infrastructure, contrasting that with what's in NetBox, and making sure NetBox remains up to date. Is that the best way that folks should interpret what the crawlers are?
That is correct, yes.
Super helpful.
We also had some kind of flows for specific things, but the best way how to, like, not the best, I would say if you want to have the current data all the time, then we wanted to explore this, and we noticed that it's really not for our environment, at least it was not really mandatory. But how we started, and we had a kind of concept, and we did it. Just in the end, we observed it was too much of a stress for the system. It's really not needed. But how you can do it also, and as I said, we managed to do that end to end, is that when you have like any kind of configuration on the device, so when you have specific log on the device that user connected and configured something, you can then trigger the pipeline. That can be a trigger for a pipeline to synchronize data for specific device. Then you do that, then the netbox is synced, and as soon as that happens, then you can start synchronization with your monitoring solution. For example, new interface is created, and you want to add that interface to monitoring. You don't need to wait like a couple of hours for the crawler to happen. It can happen because of that. So it would be like event-driven in terms of when there's a log, you can start this, and when you synchronize networks, you can start the next script, etc., and then you can synchronize everything. So that would be the best approach for real-time data or near real-time data collection on all of your systems.
I'm glad you mentioned that as well. And just quickly, as you all know, like event-driven is a big theme in network automation generally, and is a big focus of ours at NetBox Labs. Eric, it sounds like you want to tack on there a little bit.
Yeah, I was saying, I guess one of our challenges now, as we're, NetBox is becoming more visible within the company, is that people start to think of it as a monitoring system, and we want to be very clear that it is not, right? So that's kind of a challenge, right? That's, it's, in a weird way, it's a sign of success that people look to it for that, but it's not. It's as good as the last, crawler run, basically, as far as the data. And we found that, especially in the cloud is so dynamic. Like maybe it takes us, just for example, maybe it takes us an hour to scan Azure or something like that, but things are created and destroyed within that time. So you really can't use it as a real-time system. It's so dynamic, VMs spinning up and going away, that it's not really useful for that type of information. It's just so people tend to assign it that monitoring real-time role, which we have to be careful to say that it's not in this scenario.
Especially as your infrastructure gets large, right? There ends up being this spectrum and these trade-offs across that spectrum. Like, do you want everything to be exactly correct in real time, or do you want to have a comprehensive view? It's really hard to have both, right? The architecture for that is an expensive architecture, is how I would put it. One thing you touched on, Eric, in the community call that I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on a little bit is some of the choices you made in building out the cloud models in NetBox, and some of the lessons from building a model that spans hybrid cloud, I guess I would say, both data center infrastructure and cloud infrastructure, and ends up being useful. Can you guys talk about some of the things you learned in building this sort of almost single pane of glass across all of these very different estates?
I can speak a little bit to that. I mean, one of the challenges is just kind of normalizing data across, the three different clouds, right? They all have different terminology, but some of them have very unique things. Like I was thinking Azure Resource Group, right? That's something fairly unique to it. But we started with AWS. I mean, Milan really led this effort to take on AWS. And then basically I came by afterwards and tried to do similar, follow his code as an example or as guidance for doing GCP and Azure. And then there was lots of, again, going towards your theme, I think, of kind of starting small and making mistakes. And it turns out there's 3 to 4 distinct ways you can kind of iterate through a cloud to inventory it. And there's specific APIs for that purpose. And there's, show me every VM, or you can say, take a VPC and then show me all the components within that VPC and iterate through those. And we found out that I think in GCP's case that, this API is actually very elegant and gives us what I want, but it actually has a very tight resource limit on it, and it would have to go to an incredibly expensive tier to actually use that. So we had to rewrite the whole thing just to avoid that cost. So it was very iterative. And it's also a challenge, I think, as a programmer, human being, to have 3 different cloud APIs in your head at one time, trying to write the same functionality across all those. I mean, I actually enjoyed that challenge. It was a great learning experience. But I wouldn't, what if we want to add cloud number 4? That'd be a pretty incredible challenge. Do we write a crawler for every single separate cloud, or we try to do it from from one single crawler? We don't know the answer to that yet.
And here it sounds like one of the key choices you've had to make is, I guess I would say, the normalization or the least common denominator choice, as opposed to the overfitting, like let's gather all the data from all these things choice. And that's probably tied ultimately back to some of the outcomes you've all aimed for and the use cases. And a good example is the one you already described, Eric, which is sort of the security incident response use case. Like you really want to be able to ask, it sounds like, NetBox, tell me what you know about this IP address. And you don't want to have to ask that question in a language that is informed by where that IP address has been provisioned. You really want to see it across the entire estate. Is that one of the goals of how you've brought all this data together?
I mean, for me, I think, again, it's more software background, but you develop user personas, right? You could say, here's, as a security analyst, I'd like to do this, or as a Linux system administrator, I'd like to do this, right? And I think that's very helpful to have that kind of drive your approach, right? I mean, I've worked at companies where they actually came up with kind of stock photos of these people, and they create like a little personality around them, right? here's this kind of crusty old Linux administrator that wants to keep his data here, or something like that, or here's this security guy that's responding to some crisis, and in the end, all he wants to do is kind of find the throat to choke, right? Like, who's causing this incident? He's actually after who in the company is creating this problem and can help me shut that down. That's actually very hard to think about it, right? That's a very hard ask. Who owns that resource? That's how do I get to an email address or something, like the end person that owns that problem? That's actually quite difficult. So it's a combination of I think in our case, it comes down to tags on the VM or something like that. How do I and that's actually hard to automate, right? Because it's a human, and they could leave the company and that name can change, right? There's a lot of challenges around that, but that's what the security person is after. How do I find that person?
And here, of course, I love that use case because really what it says is NetBox is enriching almost like the incident response process in a way
No,
that helps
definitely. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that persona go find that person and remediate the incident, more effectively. And I guess this is where I'd love to almost like broaden the conversation a little now to what are some of the other persona, what are some of the other impacts, what are some of the outcomes that you guys have observed in implementing not just NetBox, but then the crawler infrastructure and architecture. What has it meant across the teams that almost you're servicing, I guess I would say, like with this architecture? Any other good examples or anecdotes that you guys can share?
Just to say something for your previous example. That was really great example. Why? Because we started with the crawler and the IP is over there, and we wanted to see, for example, IP. Or specific subnet or something like that, and because we extended the model in a specific way, if we want to see some IP, we had to check that in IPAM portion and then check whether the IP is over there, or we had to go to the cloud portion and then search there. And we were like, yeah, it would be really great if we could do this in a single place. And then NetBox introduced the global search and the extension for the plugin. That's the thing that I just wanted to say as well. Like, we planned something, we wanted to have something, but the community again was there to provide that for us in the next iteration, which was really great. So yeah, again, just wanted to say that.
And that happened like 3, 4, 5 times.
A lot of times, yeah.
We don't want to tag everything. We want a custom field. Custom field appears. Like, okay, it would be great that this custom field is not a text, but linked to another resource. Okay, that comes in a release after, and it just keeps on. Like, I'm forgetting all of them, but it's so strange. Imagine going to a meeting saying that you're planning to make this great improvement, but NetBox is not meeting it, and then you're just maybe reading our release notes for the next version, and it's there. And like, how?
Well, let's salute the community for that theme, which is
can
great
I add
to
on
hear.
something there?
Yeah, of course, Eric. Yeah.
I was just thinking, if you want to go back to use cases, I mean, I was thinking it's turned into like maybe there's again, security is easy to go to. I think that's a very easy case to prove. But I was thinking like software versions, we're gathering software versions on particular version of Cisco iOS or NXOS or something like that. Do we need to update all those? How do you know what's on your network and what version of software it's running? That's a huge use of NetBox. Especially again, go back to security incident. It's like, oh, there's some kind of vendor vulnerability they've told us about. So how many boxes and where are they in the network worldwide that we need to proactively upgrade because of that? Or another frequent case is, show me all the devices that are going to be end of life next year for budgeting purposes. Those are real examples where we use NetBox today.
So here, yeah, we've spanned from security all the way over to accounting almost, right? Like we gotta make a budget. And it's what's so fascinating about this for me, and I think is important, is most of the world, I think, thinks of NetBox as a network tool, right? It's a tool for the network team to automate the network or manage the network, and it is, but the impact here goes well beyond the network and infrastructure team. I think it's really telling that the two examples we've mostly focused on are for the security team and the needs of the security organization, and for the finance team, the needs of the accounting organization. Bringing this data together in a structured way like this enables the network and infrastructure teams, it sounds like, to serve the need of the broader company more effectively. Is that a good way to think of it?
Yeah, it's like I think the best. Sorry, Milan. I just think like the example of it exceeds our ability to predict it, right? Like we provide information, somebody sees a use for that we never anticipated. I think that's kind of thrilling in a way, right? That you're like, oh, okay, I can use it for this. And like, oh, we didn't plan on that, but it takes us in a new direction, like the budgeting or something like that, right? Go ahead, Milan.
No, just wanted to say something. So yeah, we helped as well for these particular cases, but we resolved the most of the things for us, for internal things and internal, let's say, processes and tickets as well. So we started with NetBox because we knew that we need some kind of call it however you like, single source of truth or source of truth for specific things. But we started adding more and more data in so we could resolve our own issues in terms of we need this particular VLAN or how many interfaces we have available on this device. What is the IP available over there? Maybe new prefix, new something like that. And then we started with scripting and automating those tasks. So we starting automating things which took for, let's say, we had to spend more than a couple of hours for providing a end user some kind of VLAN range of the IP addresses, etc., and configuration for that, also firewall rules and many other ticket types. And in the end, we had to spend a lot of time going back and forth between the devices, going back to the user, checking all of the resources, whether the range is available or something like that. Now we are certain that the data there is good, and we can reuse that data for our other automation. So we can just say, NetBox, give me this, or is there something available? Give me that, etc. So that's the thing how we solved the issue for us. We started additional scripting, and we are now using NetBox for all of that.
So, one kind of bundle it all up theme that I'd like to capture here is, there are the obvious use cases for NetBox, and it fits into the obvious problems. And as you just described, Milan, it has helped you, address the needs of the network team or the infrastructure team and tighten the loop on, incident tickets or, other change tickets, things like that in the infrastructure context. But then, as Eric talked about a little bit, the use cases have expanded maybe beyond what you originally imagined, because it turns out when you have this data in this form and in this model, it unlocks a lot of other maybe unforeseen value, which I think is a good way to capture it. I'd like to turn to one last theme for a second, which is sort of the what's next theme with you guys. So, we've touched on many elements of the journey with NetBox, from that first realization, like there must be a better way to do this, office turn up, all the way to now it is a pretty comprehensive crawler ecosystem and like a single system of record or data, I guess I would say, that is a source of truth in some cases and a source of visibility in other cases. What are you guys working on now? What are you going to work on next? Like what feels like the next place to take the architecture that you've built? I would love to hear from Danko on this, because Danko, you've been a little quiet for a little while, and I have a sense you may have some thoughts on this one. Any first thoughts?
I think the recent period behind us has been very focused on the scripts and innovation. And when we do that, one thing that we forget to do or kind of deprioritize is keeping up with NetBox releases. So something that we are starting from the next sprint is upgrade of NetBox to version 4, whichever is the current one. I haven't checked in the last few weeks, but yeah, we are gonna aim to get to the latest version. But what this brings for us is the need to go through all of these existing scripts and see how they work, how the models have changed to update and maintain them. Something we need to get better at is to rely more on the PyTests and testing infrastructure to speed this process. I'm hoping to take this cycle as an opportunity to work on that as well.
One thing I'll just note, and for those watching in the future, this may not feel as relevant, but as we record this, we're days from NetBox 4.1 moving into GA, and I think you guys may be aware that big features in branching and change management and so on are coming in that release. So don't upgrade to 4.0.x yet. Give yourself a few days. And for those who are watching, hopefully this is all moot, right? But we are really excited about 4.1 and then what's coming thereafter. Any other thoughts from Eric or Milan on what's next for you guys?
I was thinking some people have asked us, do we, NetBox is reaching out and gathering configuration, but some people are asking, does NetBox drive the configuration, right? Like, actually, do we do something in NetBox and that's actually programming some device? I'd say we're still fairly early on that. Most of our use is just gathering current state, but that would be an interesting area to continue to expand upon. Right? We interact with NetBox and it goes out and does something for us.
And that's turning that corner toward, call it source of truth or system of intent, right? And I think one of the things I love about the pattern that you guys have uncovered is there will be corners of your infrastructure where NetBox is the source of truth or the system of intent, and you make a change in NetBox and it drives config through automation or whatever. And then there will be other corners of your infrastructure, most of it maybe, where NetBox is a view of the what we'd call like the operational or the observed state. And having those things together actually makes a ton of sense, and is the real pattern that we see in the wild. There's no absolute NetBox is a source of truth or NetBox is a source of operational state. I think you guys are really representative of the complexity of the actual situation. Any thoughts, Milan, on things that are next from your point of view?
Yeah, I agree with Danko. That's our biggest challenge for the next sprint, and we will continue to work on some of these crawlers. We are currently completing this one that Danko and Eric talked about last time, so that one is almost completed. So yeah, that would be the major goal for us in the next couple of months.
We do have perpetual stories that keep on going. This is on automating our service catalogs, of that sort. And I think there are other opportunities that we want to investigate. It's just about having the time and priority.
Yeah, as always. Go ahead, Milan. Sorry.
No, we also we have a couple of ideas and completely new projects in backlog, but we didn't start them. So yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
I was thinking, sort of another off-label use of NetBox. Once I got into inventorying the data centers, the whole concepts of capacity management come up, right? It's not just current state, but this particular line of hardware is end of life. We need to plan for its replacement, or how much capacity is remaining in the data center. And there's kind of multiple forms, like, I don't know if people are familiar with, typically NetBox, Nutanix has these chassis that have, modules that go in them. So there's both the capacity of all those bays within devices, but there's also, rack use space, right? And then turns out, I believe NetBox will be very useful for planning and figuring out the current capacity. And there's significant dollars and all that, it's in the millions. And once you get to 20,000 servers or something like that scale is very interesting to me.
Yeah,
there's big. Go ahead.
Oh, it really fits that same. I like the term off-label use case, right? That same pattern that we see in the accounting use cases, or the EOL use cases, or the security use cases, right? It may not be the first thing that folks think about when they think about NetBox, but the reality is the data is super useful, and other dimensions like the power in a data center, power capacity planning, rack space capacity planning, your bays, as you said, network capacity planning, all of those things are real use cases we see where, I also think there's a lot to be shared in and around the community on the learnings. Certainly as you guys go through that journey, and others as well, as they figure out how to use NetBox's data for those kinds of use cases. It sounds like you were going to add one more thing, Eric.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's it.
All good. Well, that is actually maybe like a really good moment for us to to wind down. This has been such an interesting conversation. It's been really fun to talk with all three of you and get the different perspectives on how what you've done with NetBox has developed over time. And I also think all the way back to the start, our community is full of folks who are early in their journey, both with NetBox and then also just as automation engineers or network engineers, and some of the lessons that we've reinforced throughout, I think will really resonate. So with that, we've reached the end of our show. Eric, Danko, Milan, thank you all so much for joining and sharing with us today. It really was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kris.
And I also just want to thank everyone who's listening. All of you who watch this in the future in the NetBox community, the network automation community, you've heard from the team here what it means to have the support of a contributor community and a practitioner community like the NetBox community. There's so much contribution out there, and it makes a big difference. So thank you all. And with that, I'm going to wind us down. See you all next time.